So my name is Andrey Podoprigora. I'm gonna be moderating this, and I would like to start with you guys introducing and speaking a little bit about your experience. My own experience in UI comes from mobile platforms. I used to run and still kind of running my own studio, and we do a lot of mobile games. So mine is that, and guys here actually have more of a PC console experience, and we're going to be speaking of UI and UX design stuff, mostly in general, not applied to any platform particular. I think that's going to be more interesting. So yeah, let's start. Kylan?
All right. So my name is Kylan Coates. I'm a senior UX UI consultant. I've worked for a little over 9 years on everything from small indie games to big AAA titles. Most recently I was at Obsidian Entertainment. I've also worked on free-to-play titles for Next on America, working full-time for Pound Sand right now, so I've worked kind of on the whole gamut. Developer, publisher side, everything. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm Natalia, and I've been working in game UI, UX, and interaction design for over 8 years. Yeah, thanks. I started to work in wargaming, where I spent around like 2.5 years working in a big interaction design department, being a UI and UX. Then I moved to mobile platforms and spent some time working on hardcore projects like X-Mercs and Game Insight. And now, like for almost 2 years, I've been working in SYBO games. I'm the only like UI UX person and more like a generalist, so I'm doing almost everything. But this is also kind of a benefit for me, and because so broad experience and so different tasks you can do. So I would say, yeah, I'm more like a generalist.
All right. Yeah, I'm Riho. At the moment, I'm working for Remedy Entertainment, and previously I was working at Crytek, where I was doing previously web design, then web platforms. I've done mobile apps and mobile games as well. Then I did some VR games as well, and now I'm back into kind of console games. So I've kind of dipped into a little bit of everything, and yeah, now we're here talking stuff about UI.
Okay, thank you. And so let's dive in. So every company has its own design workflow, and each team has its own, and each professional has its own style. So maybe let's start with the thing that you believe is the most crucial part of your design workflow, and yeah, what would you think is the most important there, without which there would be no design flow as well? Yeah.
I'll start. I mean, user testing is always kind of the essential part, but I feel like all of us would say user testing. More specifically, I'm a huge proponent of prototyping quick, taking a day or two to make something work, make it rough, convey the idea. I still use Flash. I know it's like a dinosaur program now, but I can work really quickly in it. So big key features, just to prototype it. It helps convey the ideas across language platforms, across stakeholders, you know, a programmer, producer, artist, so they can all interact with the same thing. They can get the idea much more quickly than you can trying to write up a design document or anything like that. So that's something I always push for.
Yeah, so in your case, you're kind of a designer that also can program a little bit. Do you think that helps?
Yes, I can. You don't want my code in your game.
Of course.
It's terrible, but I can do enough to convey the idea, and you know that's all you need. You know, I'm not gonna. You have systems designers and programmers and all that too. Everything else.
Yeah, I think that is the most important thing to understand, that you have to prototype just enough to get the idea to the team, because otherwise it will be just like a waste of resources. Because making a prototype is just kind of the work you do to represent your idea. That's the point. And if you spend like so much time like doing like polishing prototype and this and that, so it can be just like as expensive as the normal development. I would say, at SYBO games at least, we also spend a lot of time doing prototypes. And on these prototypes, we based our quantitative user testing internally. And but if we were talking about like design workflow and like what the crucial part, like your question, I would say it's always very important to remember for whom are you designing your products, and here is a very important thing to think about the users first, and then like making prototypes and like try to come up with the new features. First, you think about your like final users.
Well, I know earlier you had talked about user personas and how much y'all use them for, but that's something we don't use as much at Obsidian. But
yeah, we actually use it, and I think the research you do before you start prototyping is also an important thing, because that's how you. If you don't design for your users, you just design for like nothing.
Yeah, well, I mean, kind of what I would add to that is, like, yes, prototyping, yes, research. I think one of the most crucial steps for me in the first early stages of like starting something is also important to just ask, like, why are we doing this, right? What is the intent of this, right? Do we actually need this specific feature, or should we go back and like explore some other things we've done before and actually find a way to fix it some other way, right? To make a more cohesive product, right? Rather than always cramming new and new features, right? Like, let's go also back a little bit and try to explore what's there already, whether we can achieve the same thing by like revamping or polishing like previous parts of the product.
Because you raised this, because you mentioned prototyping, I know we wanted to discuss like UI in general, but there's this question I wanted to ask. Do you think prototyping is done differently on different platforms? I mean, not, of course, if you work on a prototype for a console game, it's going to be different from the mobile game. But I mean the actual flow, the amount of iteration you do, and the amount of work you put into each prototype. Is that like very different in your opinion, or it's like more or less the same? What's your take?
I mean, prototyping on console is more difficult. It's difficult to get Flash to work on there, but there are some plugins and everything to kind of work around. I think as things move more to something that Riho said in one of our talks before this panel of like HTML stuff, I think that is a bit easier for console stuff. I don't know if that's been your experience, Riho.
Yeah, so actually at Remedy we're using coherent UI for like both the implementation of UI in the game and for like the menus and the HUD and that kind of stuff. So actually that's a browser that's running kind of on top of the game, right? So that means that, you know, when I make a prototype in HTML and CSS, which I actually prefer, like I find that to be the easiest for me personally, and gives you the most power to actually build like a very like more or less high fidelity prototype that, you know, conveys the main ideas of the feature, right? And the great thing about that and using coherent is that you can actually put that in the game itself, like right away, right? Or you can run it in a browser and you can actually send a link to someone, right? And they would have it on their screen right away. And I think that's actually a kind of nice way of working, and this can be like completely real time as well. So I think like tools can also improve like the whole experience of making UI.
But I would say I kind of took this experience I had from web designing and designing apps and took the tools I used like back then and actually using Sketch, because it's still like one of the best tools which can allow you to maintain big libraries of styles, export it to the prototyping tool, make interactable prototype, or like sometimes I just do like this like straight in Unity. That's also always a solution and can go to development later. But if like the future is maybe difficult to develop by programmers and support, I can easily do it like myself.
Yeah, that's good. That's always good to be able to test it out like really quickly. Rather than,
I mean, for mobiles, of course, like to make always builds and to kind of get them to your mobile phone, it's much more difficult than you have like is on PC on the when you always test it. So like making prototypes that you can, like, I don't know, just plug your phone into your computer and they get it, interactable thing. So it's
well, it's such a different experience when you're prototyping on the phone, because your thumbs blocking the way of everything, the different flow of like the size of the information.
Yeah, of course.
All that stuff comes into play. So, yeah.
So the big thing I wanted to discuss is playtesting, but before we dive into that, let's quickly go into the problem that a lot of UI clashes with game design. So sometimes when you work in a UI solution and it always affects game design and vice versa. So from my personal experience, we had a lot of like my UI designers and my game designers had a lot of argument because of some feature or some system that has to be implemented a different way just because UI wants them to work that way. So what's your take on where you draw the line between those two roles and how you manage that? Because if you're, especially if you're leading a team or had experience leading a team, so how do you, solve that issue?
I don't know. No, it is an issue that comes up quite a bit because usability touches all these different elements of the game, and it's because usability is about everything coming together into this cohesive flow, this cohesive experience. How do you approach your different game designers, your different lead artists, and convince them, hey, here's an idea, here's a take that will make the game better, but also have them feel that you're not trying to take over the project from them as well. I'm not, in my experience, it's been more on a case-by-case basis of, okay, I've worked with this programmer before, I've worked with this designer before, so let me connect with him on some level, or connect with them on some level. Everybody has their own insecurities. If the designer is worried that you might actually take over their job, how do you kind of convince them, hey, I'm not out for your pay, I'm here to do my job. If an artist isn't as self-confident in their skills, so when you make suggestions, they see that as critiques of their own skills, to kind of build up that of like, hey, you're a great person, you have a great skill set, I'm just here to help you improve, and to hit the level that you can hit at. So, yeah.
I think at this point is also like, or actually before you answer that, maybe it's a good thing to do like audience surveys, like by raise of hands, like how many people are actually like involved directly with UI here? And then the game designers.
We're not trying to take your job.
But I would say, I agree, Kylan, with you. There is no a perfect solution, but that's why I would say be involved in the very early stages, like in the process of working very close to game designers, and just spend some time developing the trust with your game designers. You will see like the results are just much better. Just like spend time, just let it be your work as well, because being a UX designer or UI designer, like which is also doing UX, is always like creating good relationships. Either it's like between you and your user, or like you and your game designer, because your game designer is actually pretty often.
Well, and I think, so much of that is, we talked a little bit before about leaving your ego at the door, making sure your whole team is synced up of like, hey guys, we're trying to make the best game possible, we're trying to make the best experience possible, how can we do that? Here's how all these things can work together and get everybody on that track. So you have less game designers trying to get their key features in. And I've been guilty of, I make this really, really cool UI and it's so innovative and it's so cool, and then it gets on the cutting block, but just having to let that go and be like,
but I mean, if you can't convince your game designer that this is good, how can you convince your user, right?
Yeah.
It's always also a thing.
That's fair, yeah.
Yeah, and I've seen some examples of this issue being resolved by doing actually playtests. The next issue I wanted to raise. So in practical terms, what is the right moment to start playtesting, and how often do you do it at all? Like I've seen a lot of games do it like on a very later stages, and it kind of worked with them. But then sometimes you cannot just fix something that was a fundamental problem in the game. So what's your take on this? What's your experience with that?
I've been going first a lot.
Yeah.
I can keep going first.
Okay, I can start.
Okay.
You want to roll a dice each time? Or
Oh, yeah.
I have dice.
I would say there are so many types of user testing, and in different stages of the project, the different user testing is relevant. If we're talking about quantitative user testing, it's usually like late stages where you need statistics, you need like to measure something. Then you need a lot of users to test, and then you do it. But if you're talking about qualitative user testing, and then you can do it for some insights, or like to be sure that this UI feature is actually bad or good, then you can do it very early, and like it's actually, you have to do it pretty early. You can do it internally, you can also do it externally if you have enough resources, but internally, if your company is relatively big, you still can find different types of people who, for example, could be potentially users. That's what I've done at SYBO Games. We have different teams managing different projects, and I made a survey. So I asked them to make a test to define the player type. So right now, everybody in the SYBO Games, they have like a link for their profile, and they know, for example, they're like, who are they? Social players, killers, achievers, like what are they actually prefer, what kind of games, and when I need to test a feature, I can go and make a group of people I think will potentially be pretty close to our final users.
Yeah, kind of what I would add to that is
Sure.
like as early as possible, right? And it doesn't actually have to be that expensive. Like what maybe one of the scary things about it is like, oh, then we need to spend a lot of time prototyping and putting all this thing together. But actually, you can get very good insights very early on by just like one thing that I've done in the past is actually do just paper prototypes, like literally print it out, right? If there's something really specific you want to test, that is more to do with like the visual like hierarchy of things, for example. You can actually, just print it out and, have a very like specific test case, and you can actually get very valuable feedback just from that, right? And that's, that's okay, that's some printing paper and some ink, but, that's a very quick way to get quick results as well. So
I think that's why it's so essential that UX UI designers are essentially these multimedia designers. You have to have experience in all these different mediums to create paper prototypes or interactive prototypes. I know for user testing specifically, I always push for key milestones. So prototype, vertical slice, those are fantastic times because you have something an experience that's wrapped up in some way that's meant to achieve some certain goals, and you generally have it as a solid build that you need to send off to a publisher or to someplace to get the milestone signed off. So you have this standalone build that you can take and you can user test the crap out of it. It doesn't have to be right after the prototype is finished. It can be a month or two. Just be aware that as more development goes in, the results from those user testing may be harder and harder to get back to. And then just the other thing too, creating an internal database of users is a fantastic long-term, that'll benefit a company long-term, a database of external users as well. It's something that is a little bit hard to start out with, but you just keep building and growing it. It's what we did when I was at Nexon America, helped push for that, and it helped us tremendously in the long run. Instead of user testing being this big looming issue, like, oh my gosh, we have to find 20 different people and they all have to be within this age group and play these different games. We had already built up this huge database from internal and external testing over the months and years. So, yeah.
So this brings us to another subdivision of this question: external testing versus internal one. What's your take on this? So you mentioned having a database of those players who will be willing to test your game. It's a huge thing, especially like from my own experience of running the alpha build of online PC game. We really do this a lot because we need, like, for each session we need at least, like every week we need at least 30 new players, which is kind of a problem for us to get out there and find them in social networks everywhere.
Like brand new players?
Mostly brand new players.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So yeah, we do a lot with social media and building this early on database of players. So, and speaking of external versus internal testing, what's your take, and what's the best case to use both of them, each of them, I mean?
Internal is always like there's ease of access because they're there inside the studio. You just have to be aware of biases. So if you are inviting your coworker's wife, they might be a bit nicer on their feedback, or they might not. I don't know. They might be like really mean. But just just being aware of calling in your coworkers, calling in. Not that you can't get good feedback, but being aware that if you're friendly with your colleagues, they may be a little bit less critical of the designs because they know that it's your hard work. They know that you've put all these months and stuff anyway. But you can, it depends on what your relationship is and what the studio culture is and all of that.
Yeah, I would say internal is usually good for like insights. Mostly, if we're talking about external, it's mostly when you need like a big amount of users. That's why you, for example, can go and order a special user testing and do like when it's about like just an amount of answers. So you create a special survey, a special questionnaire you have, and they usually very fixed. So what you're testing is just like you collect the statistics.
Yeah.
There are also like another type of testing, I would say, that is also very good to do at the early stages. For example, testing your concept. If you're not sure if you're on the right track, you can also order external testing of your idea and to see how potential users are perceiving it. We were not sure, for example, for the next theme of our game. We made it. We didn't get like a surprised by it, but we just got a confirmation that we were right and we're on the right track.
So basically show them the game early on and ask them what they feel about it.
To show them the concept.
Okay.
For example,
not in the game, just
you show them character design, you show them like this and that, and that's how you made. We actually made one really big correction based on it.
Okay.
But the focus group testing.
Yeah.
Kind of,
Yeah, it kind of like I've done a lot of internal testing, and like with this kind of stuff, like you said, I have to be careful of the biases. But I think if you are testing something very, very specific, where you can kind of like account for that bias, right? Where the information is kind of irrelevant to like what their opinion about it is, right? If it's more about the visibility of things like hierarchy and that kind of stuff, like I think if you know specifically what you're looking for, right? Then you might be able to like weed out some of the bias there, and then internal like playtesting is a good tool for that, right? And it's quick and easy to do basically, right?
I mean, even with external testing, if you have people in the room, your game designers or your project leads, making sure that they don't kind of disrupt the testing themselves and push their own agenda. Like, no, you're doing that wrong. It's like, just shut up, let them play the game and just watch. And that's something. When I was at Nexon, everybody that we would bring in for user testing to observe, we always told them like, you can't say anything. You just sit in the back. You can take notes. Towards the end, we would, at the end of the session, we would ask them if they had any questions. But otherwise, we'd be like, just watch.
But sometimes just record. Also a good thing because you can then rewatch it many times and to see some details. It's actually also.
Yeah, I think it's one of the first biggest milestones for every UI UX designer to actually participate, not maybe participate, but to witness the actual playtest of how your actual users who didn't know anything about your game or product first interact with it, and you sit in the same room. It's kind of, you want to kill yourself first, but then after that it's really liberating. I think every UI designer has to go through this phase. It's really like a milestone. After that, it kind of.
Or it could be amazing.
Yeah. Become like a grown-up UI designer after that.
To me, that's terrifying. You have a user testing session and everything goes right. I'd be like, oh my gosh, something's going to blow
Something
up.
is wrong.
Like,
No, but when you see someone actually being like understanding the things without explanation, and you're like, okay, maybe I did something right.
Yeah, gotta be careful of that. So let's dive into production a little bit. So to this day, even where there's a lot of different engines for every possible platform, we still kind of lack the universal solution for UI. Still, there's nothing like on a universal basis, and also Flash kind of died recently. Also, Scaleform is in trouble, and each platform has its own like more or less best practices to use, but still they kind of lacking. So what do you use in your production flow, and how does that affect your process? Is that something you had to, correct on the go just before you use this tool or that tool? So can you share a little bit of that experience?
Well, since that was the question that I had, so probably I should start, I guess.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so like I said before, we're using coherent UI, so that's the HTML, CSS, JavaScript kind of renderer. Well, I mean,
sorry, by coherent design you mean that all your UI looks the same, or is that? Can you explain the term for the audience?
It's a name. It's a it's a name of.
Oh,
it's a product. Tool. Yeah, it's a tool. Yes.
Sorry, yeah, I have to check it out.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, like at the moment, if you look at any big platform, right? If you look at Windows, you look at Mac, you look at iOS, Android, right? All of these platforms have their own kind of consistent, like let's say UI components, right? Like they have their own like drop down. Here's what a drop down looks like on iOS, for example, and here's what a sliding list looks like, and that kind of stuff, right? And kind of at least in the kind of console space and PC space, that doesn't really exist, right? Like everything is kind of done custom, basically, for each game and each platform as well. Or like it's shared between two different platforms. Like what I would say could be interesting, right? Something to explore is if we had, for example, a PlayStation UI, right? Like that you would have standardized PlayStation UI components. That doesn't mean, like all the UI has to look the same, right? But just to have kind of guidelines and kind of standardized way components work, right? So if somebody is picking up a PlayStation game, right, and then the next day buys another PlayStation game, and with similar enough like gameplay concepts, right, then they should be able to understand like what's happening here, right? And that does happen with mobile apps, right? So if you pick up an app, you more or less know how to get around, right, in the next app that you download, right? So that's kind of what my intent behind was this question was that maybe Sony and maybe Microsoft should have their own UI like guidelines and kind of like human interface guidelines, right?
I mean, they have TRCs, they have the technical requirements, but it's not.
Those are very specific, right?
Yeah, it's not as all encompassing. The only thing I would caution is to not squash the opportunity to have unique interface solutions come about, and that's, I don't know where that balance is of enforcing more guidelines, but you still have the bandwidth to, somebody figures out how to make a better save screen, save load screen, or better options menus. Options menus terrify me because it's all UI and buttons and all this complex stuff.
It's just one of those double-edged swords. It's like, wait, how much is too far, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you see a lot of like custom stuff also in the app space, right? Like people are doing creative stuff with it, and I think that's great as well, right? But something, for example, as trivial as a save screen, right? I think that should be consistent across all games, right? That's something that happens over and over and over again in every game. That should be something that people should be very familiar with, right? And understand, like, intuitively, basically, from game to game.
I can also add that in our company, it was very important to create some consistency across different projects, because we're also like taking care of our brand. And for me, it was a big task to make a library of patterns, I would say UI patterns, we would use across different projects to support our brand. And it was based on Unity UGUI. We based our own UX framework, so it's a library of components we can reuse across different projects. Sometimes it's not just like a button, but actually a slice or like a menu screen. Like, for example, options should look the same, a splash screen should look like, behave the same, something like that. And I think this is all about it, because there's always room for improvement. I mean, today this pattern is okay, but after a year you find a better solution, and then it's just a way of doing it. I mean, there are so many websites where you can find good UI patterns, and I think it just has to be kind of international, and people just need to use the best from it. But at the same time, you also need to build something special to support, for example, your own brand, and to be recognizable.
So I mean, with any sort of like middleware though, because Scaleform was kind of this, not completely universal, but fairly widely used middleware of, as a UI designer, if you knew Scaleform, if you knew Flash, then you can pretty much work on a variety of consoles. You can go to a new company and be like, yeah, I can do the UI. You know, now if you go like, I've worked in Unity, but I haven't worked with NGUI. I have worked with UMG in Unreal Engine, but that can limit the game studios that I apply to, you know, which then kind of cloisters off and segments the different types of UI that you're able to create. So I mean, should there be more middleware that's available?
But I think it's more like an approach. So if your approach is to build some kind of library of patterns, I also have like, you know, different pages in Confluence when I filled with describing how you should and how you shouldn't do. So it's based on this. For example, if you go to like material design guidelines or Apple guidelines, they're all about interaction patterns. And like for our brand, we do the same thing.
Yeah, so I think now is the time to...
Yeah, well, let's ask the guys here. Yeah, I started to show the gifts actually to attract attention, yes, while you were talking. So yeah, we have amazing gifts from our speakers and we have questions.
Hi, do you test also on live game, like A/B test the UI elements?
Yeah, of course.
And how often and how it works?
Yeah, we have a team of analytics and we run like A/B testing, collect data, make decision, improving it. I mean, it's all there, of course.
I guess that's kind of like constantly running, right? There's always some
Yeah,
kind
sure.
of A/B test in the run, right?
Is there a bad way to do A/B testing?
Yes.
Of course it is.
Yeah, I mean that's so understanding. And we had talked a little bit before. Appropriate user testing at specific times. I mean, A/B testing is great for very small changes. So if is a button blue or red, is that more successful? Do you include this kind of sign of life for an online game of total active users or something like that? Do you include it or do you not include it? That's ideal for what A/B testing is for. If you're doing like full redesigns of a website or user interface, there are way too many factors for A/B testing to be effective for that. That's where you want to do more qualitative one-on-one interviews and really focus on the insights you gather from that.
Yeah, and you kind of touched it before, but so if you do A/B testing for example, green or blue button, right? How often does it actually, like the results are like the ones that you expected?
I don't know. It's such a, like you're fine-tuning things to such a degree at that point. It's kind of
So you don't make predictions, you just wait for the results maybe, or
That's kind of it, right? You just kind of like curious, like basically why you do it is like, okay, I don't know which one of these is better, right? So you kind of shouldn't really have an opinion about it, right? You just go in and it's like, okay, let's find the best one.
No, I
right?
think you're still biased, like.
You're probably a little bit,
because
still, yes.
testing like two different starter packs in your game can be like a different story, right? And it's like affects game design, it affects your monetization.
yeah, I think I like the approach. Like, you know, you are not supposed to have an opinion. That's how actually,
That's
you know,
purest.
That's the idea.
Yeah, you
That's
just
the
have
idea.
it. I mean, I'm sure like
You have it anyway, right?
yeah, you have it anyway.
because I think still there are a lot of companies that even though they agree that, you know, A/B testing is good, you know, they don't do it. You know, they think, yeah, I have an opinion. Why would I, you know, ask others? You know.
There's definitely, leaving that ego and just understanding
Yeah.
you're making games for players.
Exactly.
That's, yeah.
So I think we have a couple more questions from the
Yes.
audience.
Hi guys, thank you very much for. I can say that the name is speech, but you know, dialogue. I have two questions. One hard, the second one very simple, and I want to start with hard. Today is very popular position that the less UI you have or your game has, the better. What do you think about this position? And why I'm asking, because one simple case, because I love menus in games. I like all these stylish games. And for me, this position sometimes sounds crazy. So, your turn.
I mean, I think it depends on, this is the non-answer that I hate. It depends. It depends on who your users are, what they value. For more casual players, you generally want cleaner experiences, less, this term called cognitive load, it's just the amount that somebody has to think about things. You want to reduce that cognitive load to a very low level because that reduces the barrier to entry into your experience. Now, for more complex, a bit more competitive games, like Armored Warfare that I talked about earlier, there's a ton of UI in there because the player base are these strategic, competitive players. They want to know exactly all the details, all the levels of every part of their vehicles. Where is everyone? Where have they been shot? How much damage was it? Did it ricochet? What type of ammo was it? They want to know all that information because that's the experience that they enjoy and that's the experience that they expect. So the more that we try to streamline some of that, we often got pushback from certain players of like, but I need to know this. This is how I stay competitive. You know, you look at StarCraft 2 of like click actions per minute or clicks per second or something like that. That's the type of level where there's more. You want to show more information. I think it comes down to showing the appropriate information to the player at the appropriate time when they need it.
But don't you think it's so, like, wouldn't it be nice if you would have like just load information to your brain without like seeing it like as a UI element? I mean, I would agree that less UI is the better, and it exists only because we just haven't found a way how to like get rid of it. That's the point. I can maybe say that UI can be a thing only in like one case, when it's a special interface and when it's like maintaining a feeling of nostalgia. This can be a case in games because games are still mostly for making fun, and like feeling of nostalgia is also an element of having fun. But I would agree with your statement. The less, the better.
I mean, like, first of all, great question. So let's give this man a gift, please.
I was going to, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I'm on this boat of like less UI better. I mean, like, okay, my experience is a bit skewed because I was doing VR games before, right? So of course there you want to be more immersed in the world, right? And I think kind of it boils down to what kind of product you're making, right? Like you were saying, is like, you know, if you're making a very competitive product, UI probably is actually the most efficient way and the best way to show that information, right? If you're making something a bit more simpler, like I always love to give this example is Inside, right? There's no UI in this game at all, like, and I love this, right? And I usually don't need it, right? Because the product is such that you don't actually need the UI, and actually it would make it worse, right? So there, like, everything is communicated within the world itself, right? So if we can find like as much as possible that we can show in the world in a more, like, let's say, natural way, right? We're all living in this 3D world space, right? But we learn stuff from the 3D world, right? And the more we can use the 3D space in the game to actually convey that information, right? I think we can actually do it better and like more intuitively than a 2D interface could be, right? But at the same time, of course, it's like this, you know, back and forth. It's like, you know, like you want to convey information in the world, and it's very hard to do it very well, right? So, you know, you have to, like, yeah, it's tricky. That's the point, basically.
I think that maybe our gaming experiences have surpassed our feedback that we have. I mean, that's, for Armored Warfare, there's all these different types of information that the player wants, and these complex systems that are going on. But, you know, visually and orally and all this kind of stuff, there's only so many ways you can do it. I mean, if you had some haptic suit that you're wearing and, you know, you feel little pinpricks and that's where you're getting shot, like, yeah, then you don't need UI for it. But oftentimes our systems designs kind of surpass the type of feedback we can give in a screen-based experience. I mean, VR is one step kind of into that co-present space where you can have less UI because you can incorporate all this other feedback in this space that you're in.
Ideally, yes.
Ideally.
Simple and very little small question. You're a great professional, so we know your games, but maybe can you name what the game among the last one was the most inspiring for you? Thank you.
The ones that you played, like the last games that you played, like.
Have you played Stellaris?
I know the game. Yeah, very well.
So, playing Stellaris, the more and more that I look at it and analyze it, the more incredibly impressed I am with how they show such a huge variety of information, but they show it consistently and they show it concisely throughout the entire experience. It's a beautiful game, it's a complex game, but everything from the icon use to the locations of all these different, because there's like 9 or 12 different currencies you have to keep track of, which, you know, if somebody just said that to me as a UX UI designer, you know, slapped them. Like, what are you thinking? But it actually works incredibly well. So yeah, Stellaris actually really impressed me with how they presented all that information.
Oh, everybody. Okay. I don't know. I can say the same thing as in like your previous question. Every game with like less UI, like recently I finally played Stanley Parable without any kind of UI. It was perfect. But at the same time, I also a big fan of card battlers. I was previously a fan of Magic the Gathering, and their PC version and mobile version were kind of terrible. And right now I'm playing Eternal. It's just game about UI. So
Yeah, you should switch to Hearthstone.
I'm pretty happy.
It is. Yeah, for me personally, I was amazed by this recent iOS game, which I think a lot of people heard already, Goragoa. I think it's called Goragoa.
Yeah.
It's basically one of the cases where there's no UI, but there's I think they don't even have a UI guide. That's basically the game design. So it's ingrained in the game design. How do you interact with the game? I think it's kind of similar to another game from SYBO guys, which is called Device 6, which also has more or less the same feeling, I think, well, at least for me.
That reminds me of, have you played Reigns? R-E-I-G-N-S? So it's
yeah, of course.
Yeah. It's
this card game, which is kind of crazy.
It's like Tinder. So this choice comes up, and you have to swipe left or swipe right if you agree or disagree. So you're a king, and you're going, yeah. So that it's UI, but it's also systems design and game design and all this put together. But that was just such a brilliant thing, and playing it, and it's so funny and it's great, and like that, I was very impressed with that. And such a clean, simple experience. Yeah.
All right, we have one more. Do you want to answer too?
Well, I mean, like,
Kind of have to.
He's trying to avoid. He's trying to avoid this file. He's trying to go.
It's an interesting question. Like, I get the question a lot. Like, every time I introduce myself to someone new, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, I do like the menus and that kind of stuff and games, right? They're like, oh yeah, like what's your favorite like menu from a game, right? And it's always a super tricky. It's always such a tricky like thing to like answer, is because like as a designer, I'm always looking at the flaws of things, right? So like basically, there's nothing that kind of I can't give you an example, right?
Everything is terrible.
Everything is terrible, right?
No favorite menus.
No. So.
All right. Well, probably in the future. You go.
No, that's fine.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions.
All right. Have you ever had the challenge of taking a PC or a big screen game and then porting it to the tiny mobile screen? One example I can give, I love playing World of Warships, and recently I installed World of Warship Blitz for mobile phones, and so compressing the lot of space for menus to the tiny screen, and how do you keep up with the challenge?
I actually stopped working in wargaming when we started like doing the mobile version.
That's the bullet.
But that time I was working on a project called XMAX. It's just like an XCOM, and the company started to develop the product for tablets without thinking how would you implement it like on iPhones. Like, what are the percents like right now? People are playing on tablets. It's not very high. That's not what you have to think about first. But it is a challenge, and a challenge if the development has been already on the like maybe not very early stages, like later stage. Then you have to adapt it and adapt like the PC version for it. But it is possible. But you need to like keep it coherent through all the devices. That's the point.
Yep.
I haven't.
Me neither. Sorry.
Okay, more questions?
Hey, great panel discussion, by the way. It's really interesting. I'm a junior game designer, but I have like a sincere interest in UI, and actually I have to provide for my developer not only how the game is working, but how the screens look like. And so I have to like sort of invest a lot of time into creating interactive prototypes of screens, how I want the transitions to be, and how I want the leaderboard to pop up, for example, or whatever. Yeah, so there's lots of different kinds of software out there, like Proto.io or Adobe XD or Framer. What is your go-to tool for doing something like this, for transitions and
Principle.
things like
I would recommend Principle.
that?
It's pretty powerful tool. Yeah, it's not for free, and but for me, Adobe XD is mostly for prototyping simple applications, not for like games, because games sometimes require pretty complex interactions. And I use these two tools together, like Sketch and Principle, so exporting every artboards like automatically and synchronize the names if like you keep naming the stuff properly. So, or maybe even something more powerful. There is a kind of a very new tool called Haiku, and they also use timelines like in Adobe After Effects, so you can actually create pretty complex animations inside. But I mean, After Effects is always kind of, if you need something really complex.
I mean, that's, yeah, if it's got to be interactive, I use Flash. I would not suggest using Flash. But I do use Flash. I'm trying to cure myself from it. And then for everything else, I mean, wireframes, I do Illustrator. Visual mockups, I use Photoshop and After Effects. Nothing really that fancy. But I need to learn more.
Yeah, I do what this guy does, but I do it in HTML and CSS.
Alright.
Yeah, just a kind.
Yeah, so I actually gave away your prizes, your gifts.
Okay, I think there was one more person.
Okay.
All right. Thank you mainly for the great panel discussion. And I would like to ask you hopefully a simple question. What is your favorite platform or engine for designing UI and UX? And what would you recommend a beginner designer?
I mean, for beginning, I would say Unity. It's just it's made for small teams and for small development, so you can really control everything yourself. I've actually talked to people who prototype in Unity before implementing things in CryEngine or in Unreal. For longer term stuff, I mean, if you can learn UMG in Unreal, I see more developers using Unreal because it's free. UMG is just a pain in the ass. It's such a hard thing to learn. You know, some things it does well, like it adapts to different screen resizing really, really easily. It's just built in. But other things, you know, it kind of struggles with. But I would suggest starting with Unity. You can control everything and really get a good feel for the user experience, from audio to visual to, you know, reaction times for stuff to optimizing interactions. You can have a control over all that.
Also start a C# basic course at the same time.
Yeah,
Very useful.
Okay, so I will let Andrey ask you. Okay, last question from the audience. Okay.
Hello. Thanks for discussion. I have a question. What influence or maybe pressure do you have from other successful popular games? For example, you want to do something special, but it already resolved in very famous games, for example, and you think if I do it, my conversion can be worse.
So, I mean, well, one thing, I'm going to answer what I think you're asking. So, copying other successful games, you need to understand why it was successful in the first place, because there are some very successful games that are succeeded kind of in spite of themselves, and they don't actually have very good user experience. But you know, if there are big brand names behind it, or if they were in the first to market or first to genre or most successful in that genre, they kind of have the freedom to be successful. For when I was at Nexon, we would often copy a lot of stuff from Blizzard, from World of Warcraft, with their landing pages and all this kind of stuff to get people to sign up for our games. And it wasn't working for us. People thought we were super sketchy and like we were trying to sell their information and steal their data and all this kind of stuff. What we found is that the techniques we were copying from Blizzard could get away with it because everybody knew what Blizzard was. So if you put a big flashy download button on a web page, people are like, oh, it's Blizzard, it's fine, I trust them. But if you put it for Nexon, when we put a big download button on there, like, what's this? Is this some like Korean, Japanese company? And like you click on it, and there's some weird downloader name that they don't recognize, and they're like, oh no, they're trying to steal everything, steal my identity, all this stuff. And that was a big learning curve to explain to the stakeholders, like, guys, we can't just copy the big boys. Like, we have to understand why they're successful.
Yeah. I would say there is a difference between not inventing a bicycle again and between just blind copying, like whatever. And of course, I mean, if you would look at interfaces, even very successful games, you will see that this is not why they have become successful, right? Of course, we need to understand that if people get used to some patterns, yes, they will be very familiar, and like if you're familiar with some stuff, it's always good for users at least to feel safe. But every decision should be explained, at least for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, one part of it is like, why are we copying this, right? And like, sorry, it's kind of going off the different direction than you, but and the second thing is like, is it like you can't really take like something completely out of context, copy it and paste it into your product, right, and expect it to just magically work, right? You have your own thing that works in a different way with different systems, right? Sometimes you do have to like go a little bit beyond and think like, okay, how does this fit in like globally into our game, right? And yeah, just a straight copying an interface like pattern from another game probably won't work, right? It can work, right? But yeah, again, you need to know why and like why you're copying it, right? Or like not copying, but even if it's like something very like it's just a pattern, right? Like, is it actually good? Does it actually make sense in our context, right?
Well, in the same vein, I think that it can be valuable to look at experiences that aren't within your genre. Like so many times game design can be very insular. Like if you're making an RPG, you're only looking at other RPGs. But there might be some really interesting things UI-wise and systems-wise in strategy shooters or in casual games or these innovations and some really out there weird indie games. And if you can't understand why they did it, why it was successful in these other indie games, and how it could be successful in yours, that's how you can take that extra little step above your competitor and stand out.
Exactly. I think it's like super nice. It's okay to copy, just make it better.
Yeah,
make it apply to your product.
It's not as sexy and exciting, but like if you can just be a little bit better, oh my gosh, you can be so successful. Like you really can.
Okay, so last question for me.
You have last question to wrap it up. Yeah.
You all guys have a lot of experience, and if you had the chance to go to the past, like in time, and speak to yourselves at the start of your career, what advice would you give to yourselves then?
Don't rely on color to show differences in UI. I would have saved so many weeks of reworking and all this. It's such a stupid thing, but yeah, people are colorblind. It's a pain in the butt to accommodate for it. Just don't use color. Use other modes to differentiate information. Yeah, I'd go and slap myself and just stop.
That's a good one.
I would say try more. It's all about trying and trying new approaches. There is no other way to know what will what won't work, and just put your ego somewhere else.
Yep.
I would say all of the above, and also on top of that, try to invest, like try to think about your process of design as well. Like early on, I probably went about like starting features and like starting a new project, like kind of like just jumping into here and then going from this step to the other step and like kind of jumping back and forth, and I didn't really have a very well-defined process of actually how to design a product from start to finish, right? And I think spending some time like learning about what kind of design processes are out there, right? And what are the kind of steps to getting to a final product. I think like good sources of reading, for example, would be product design, right? Like product design process is very, very similar in that sense. Right? I think that could be a very good basis for like UI design as well, or user experience design at the very least. So.
Thank you guys for this interesting discussion.